Good morning. My name's Chad, and I imagine that some of you saw that video and then saw me walking up and thought, that makes sense. For those of you who don't know me, like I said, my name's Chad. I'm a longtime, part-time attendee of St. Thomas. Thank you. And a little bit more about myself. I have a complicated relationship with faith, a complicated relationship with church, and a complicated relationship with Advent. So let's get into our Advent series. I think I should also warn those of you who don't know me, as I get older, it seems like the more often I get up and speak in public, the more I cry. And it feels like there might be an atmospheric river in the forecast for today. So I'm just warning you about that. So we are in the Advent sermon series. This is the second week of it. Even Here is the title of it. Encountering Jesus in hostility, ambivalence, cautious hope, and joy. And I think when we look at this list here, it's tempting to think of that as a progression. The farther you get to the right, the better off you are at doing Advent. Maybe some of us see it as a report card. Joy is an A, cautious hope is a B or a C, ambivalence, D. And then hostility, you're failing at Advent. But that's not how I see it, and I don't think that's the intent of it. It's more of an inventory of how people engage with the message of Advent, with the Christmas season. And last week, Matt talked about the hostility part of it. The idea that entrusting Jesus with every aspect of our lives is threatening. And when we respond to Jesus with that hostility, if we're not sure that we want to surrender every aspect of our lives to Jesus, we're met with a loving non-anxious presence. If you missed the sermon, it's available online, and I would encourage you to go watch it because it's really good. So this week we're going to be looking at ambivalence, and there are those of us who, like Charlie Brown, feel a bit conflicted during Advent. I don't know if you caught everything that Charlie Brown said, but at one point he said, I'm not feeling how I'm supposed to feel. And I think a lot of us bump into that at Advent during Christmas time. And as much as I'm not one to second guess Linus most of the time, I do have an issue with his response to Charlie Brown. What he says, you're the only person I know who can take a wonderful season like Christmas and turn it into a problem. And I think some of us internalize that. And we do have this, we feel a conflict during Advent, that the message of the season we're all in support of, but our experiences, our feelings don't match that message. And we feel that conflict. And we hear Linus in the back of our head saying, you are a freak. You are the only one who feels that way. And thank goodness for Charlie Brown, who says the quiet parts out loud. And we have a model for someone who says, I don't feel like I believe I should feel right now. So as I alluded to earlier, I have a long history of ambivalence in regard to Advent. I was thinking about that this week, and I really think that the biggest problem I have with Advent is every single year it coincides with Christmas. Right? All I want is to just be able to have some peace and solitude and just contemplate the message of Advent, of the Christmas season. What the prophet Isaiah said, that God's anointed one will come to bring good news to the oppressed and healing to the brokenhearted, provide liberty to the captives, and set the prisoners free, and provide comfort to all who mourn. Who can't get behind that message? I love that. But my experience in trying to engage with that is all this stuff around the Christmas season floods in and kind of takes over everything. And so I'm left feeling really, I can't tell you how many times I nearly ruined Christmas for our family. Because especially when there's little kids involved, there's so many things that need to happen for Christmas to come by. I see a lot of moms that are saying, yeah, tell me about it. And so there was times when Cassie would say, I need help with Christmas. It's this is a magical time for the kids, and we need to make that. And I'd be like, we don't really need to do that. It's really about the message of Christ coming and all that stuff. And if it had been left up to me, my kids would be in counseling every Christmas for the baggage that I'd heaped upon them. But I think what I want to get at is we're tempted to think when we feel that conflict that we're the only ones. Nobody else feels that way. And we have all this pressure to manufacture meaning in Advent and to make something special happen. And it can be so hard to do that because of all the things that I talked about, because we have to go out and buy presents, and there's decorations, and there's meals, and there's getting together with loved ones, and not to mention, figuring out a way to finally bring about peace on earth is no small task. And I haven't even touched on some of the relational difficulties that can come around during Advent when we're supposed to be getting together with loved ones, but there's relationships that are strained or broken, or people loved ones that aren't there to celebrate with us anymore. And there's supposed to be this message of Christmas time and Advent that it's hopeful and joyful, and in reality, we don't always feel that way. It feels painful and awkward, and we're frustrated because we know how we're supposed to feel, but we don't necessarily feel that way. So what do? We take our cue from Linus, right? Charlie Brown in the Christmas special. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Charlie Brown goes through wondering what is the true meaning of Christmas, and he's so flustered. All of the attempts just fall on their faces, and finally Linus says, well, you want to know what the true meaning of Christmas is, Charlie Brown? Let's look at Luke chapter 2. And he goes on, he quotes the Christmas story. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to Luke chapter 2. And we're not going to read the whole thing. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with it. But we're going to look at some pieces of it. And then, for fun, we're not even going to spend a whole lot of time looking at what the words here say. We're going to look at what's not being said. And see what's going on. We're going to focus not so much on the main characters in this story, which I was surprised to kind of realize or be reminded there's not that many. When you read through this story, there's the shepherds, there's Mary, there's Joseph, there's Simeon and Anna in the temple, and the rest is just crowd. And so what I want to look at is how the crowd responds to the message of the advent of the Christ. So we'll start with Luke 2:15. So the angels have already appeared to the shepherds and told them all the news, told them about Jesus, and said, "Go spread the word." So when the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. All who heard that were amazed. I'm just going to say, were they? And I'll get into that. I'll get into that later. So Jesus is born, and 40 days later, Mary and Joseph take him to the temple. And every good Jew knows that this is what you do. After a child is born, there's a purification sacrifice that needs to happen. You go to the temple to do that. And if it's a firstborn son, then you dedicate that child to God. So 40 days later, they go to the temple. And this is what happens when they get to the temple. When the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male shall be designated as holy to the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. And I think, there we go, this man was righteous and devout, looking forward to the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit rested on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Guided by the Spirit, Simeon came into the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what was customary under the law, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Master, now you're dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation." And then we'll move on. And there was also a prophet, Anna, who had parents, and she was from a tribe. She was of great age, having lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, then as a widow to the age of 84. She never left the temple, but worshiped there with fasting and prayer night and day. At that moment, she came and began to praise God and to speak about the child to all who were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. So we hear references to a crowd, but we don't hear a whole lot about them. We don't have a whole lot of details. But as far as I can tell, after this story, they just kind of dissipate. They disappear. We don't hear from them during the life and ministry of Jesus after that. And I wonder what happens. But even during this time, I wonder, why do I question these people in Bethlehem if they were really amazed at the message of the Messiah? Because every one of them probably knew that in 40 days, Mary and Joseph were going to have to walk the 6 miles from Bethlehem to Jerusalem to complete the purification rituals at the temple. And we don't hear that any of them went before that. If they believed that this was the Messiah, don't you think they would have lined the way? They would have run ahead and announced to everybody in the temple, the Messiah's here. The Messiah's here. This is great news. But what we hear is that Mary and Joseph, as far as we know, go by themselves. And it's left to Simeon and Anna to announce that this is the Messiah. And even with that, it says that they offered a couple of turtle doves or pigeons, which is required by law. Actually, what the law says is for this ritual, you should sacrifice a lamb. And if you're too poor, if you can't afford a lamb, then bring a couple of turtle doves or a couple of pigeons. Don't you think if this crowd in Bethlehem was really amazed at the story of the Messiah, that they would have taken up an offering and bought a lamb. You're not going to, and say to Mary and Joseph, you're not going to sacrifice 2 turtle doves. This is the Messiah. We're pitching in for a lamb, right? But that doesn't happen. We don't really know what happens to these crowds. But I think we can say that there's probably a fair amount of ambivalence. That was their reaction to what Jesus said, because we don't hear some great groundswell. We don't hear of these people going out before Jesus and spreading the word. We don't even hear about them when Jesus starts his ministry showing up again and say, hey, I was there at the temple. I was there in Bethlehem. I like this guy. It could be that some of those same people did become followers of Jesus. We're part of the group of disciples that followed him around, but we don't know that for sure. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of those people may have just responded with ambivalence, at best. At best. And so I want to look at one other thing that we don't see in this story that really stands out to me, and that is condemnation. If all these people did witness, if they were in the splash zone of Advent and witnessed what was going on and responded in ambivalence at best, Jesus never comes back and condemns them for not doing a better job, not responding better. There's no condemnation. There's only invitation. I really like what Matt said last week when he was preaching about the response of God, the response of Jesus to hostility and to ambivalence is loving, non-anxious. Loving, non-anxious presence. We can see what God has done. We can hear the words, and it's our choice how we respond. And I think I'm thankful that there's no pressure, there's no condemnation if we don't respond, because the reality of the situation is there's so much pain, there's so much loss that we have to sift through and to sort through. And it's difficult to figure out how to do that when what we are experiencing doesn't always match the message that we've received. So as we go into this Advent season, I want you to feel the permission to be ambivalent about Advent, if that's where you're at. I think it's much more important that we engage honestly with how we're feeling than it is to act like we feel like we're supposed to. So what are my takeaways from this? I think it's important for me to remember that in the story of Advent, God does the heavy lifting. I have spent way too much time in my life trying to manufacture meaning during Advent. And I think it only makes it worse, and it only creates more anxiety for me and the people around me. And I just become miserable. We don't have any responsibility to manufacture meaning during Advent. God does all of that work. If you look at this story, the most that anybody does is wait. Simeon was at the temple. Anna was at the temple. All they were doing was waiting. They weren't doing anything to bring about the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah. They were just waiting, and they were willing to respond when the time came. So I'd argue that is the most that you have to do this Advent. I mean, in a spiritual sense, there is a lot that you have to do for Christmas, right? There's a lot. It can be overwhelming. But I think the good news of Advent is you don't have to do anything to manufacture meaning. A loving, non-anxious presence of God will provide that. So we're gonna have a time of sharing in just a little bit. Matt's gonna come around with a mic. Usually at this time, the person who's preaching will close in prayer, but I don't really pray that much in that way in my normal life, so it feels insincere for me to close in a prayer. But I do want to leave you with a blessing, and I honestly don't know what that's going to look like because I've really struggled with it. I've really tried to manufacture a meaningful blessing, and it just wasn't coming to me. But I'll leave you with this. This Advent, may you have the clarity to understand how it is you are encountering Jesus. And may you feel the freedom to react to that and respond to that in the way that is the mostest for you. I don't even know what it is. May you be honest about where you're at. And may you not feel any pressure to respond like you feel like you're supposed to. Let's take a few moments of silence, and then Matt is going to start coming around with a microphone.